Thank you so much, Owen. I'm Jan Erola. I'll be hosting this discussion with Ann Selin, the head of PAM, which is the labor union of the service sector, and also the head of UNI, 20 million workers all around the world.
Well, I used to be.
Okay.
I used to be the head of it.
Right. And Partanen, who's written a wonderful book about the Nordic model of everything, pohjoinen teoria kaikesta. You've been promoting socialism. Is that right?
If you ask the Americans, yes.
Americans.
Outright communism.
Right. That's what we will come back to your Owen's claims, revolutionary claims, but Anu, you've been promoting, at least you've been called the socialist model. It doesn't ring a bell. Do you actually call it socialism, or is that really is the Nordic model really anti? Is that really anti-business?
No, not at all. So I have been living 10 years in the United States, and now I've moved back to Finland. And while I was there, I wrote this book for Americans, basically comparing Nordic countries, and especially the social structures in Nordic countries, healthcare, education, all these public services, to how things are in the United States. And so I compared ordinary people's lives and so on. So that's my approach as a journalist. And of course, in the United States, anything that in the Nordic countries we would just call kind of common sense these days is called socialism. They don't really use the word communism so much anymore, but that's kind of what they mean. And I think what Owen was saying is you can see it so well in America, and I think you can see it in Finland too, that a lot of this it's battle over regulations and laws and practices, but it is also battle over the discussion that we're having and how people see these things. And for example, like Jan is asking, one thing is the idea that in the United States, for example, whenever you say anything about, oh, look at all these rankings in which the Nordic countries do so well, that they do well in education, they do well in health, they do well in children's well-being, and the Americans say, well, that's all fine and well, but you have no successful companies. There's no innovation coming from America. This is anti-business. It's not possible for anybody to run a company if all the workers are constantly on some sort of paid vacation or on parental leave. So your system is about to collapse because of that. That's genuinely what a lot of American conservatives believe. Any moment now, Nordic countries are going to collapse because it's not possible to run a successful business. And I think even, I would heartily agree with Owen about that the trade unions, that workers have to stand up for themselves. But of course, we all want successful companies, we want successful employers. And so I think it's really important to really look at the facts and discuss the fact that, do we actually have successful companies here? I believe we do. Do we have extremely wealthy people who, some earned, some unearned, have made a lot of money with their businesses and companies? We do. So the fact that we have these protections for workers in whether you can fire them or how easily you can fire them, or whether they have the right to have a parental leave, whether they have the right to retire at some point, it's not at all destroying the ability to have a company no matter what we're told. And I would just like to point out that I really actually think that the Nordic model, with its protections in many ways, supports entrepreneurs. For 10 years, I was a freelancer, so in a sense an entrepreneur myself in the United States. And over here, we have protections where even if your business fails, you can send your child to public daycare, your child will get into a university, your family will have health care. All of these actually support entrepreneurs and businesses and risk-taking. And I think we don't see that discussion a lot, because I really think that the discussion has been hijacked sort of by the side that claims that all this is anti-business.
So, Ann, do we need more deregulation?
Well, it seems like our government thinks that the businesses do need deregulation, but the unemployed and the regular people, they need more control and more regulation. So that seems to be the case. So it's just like Owen was explaining about the British situation. We're at the same point. And I do think that we need to win this battle. I'm really afraid that if we don't, we will suffer greatly. We already are in a situation where the nation is being more and more polarized, and we need to protect the system that we have, not only for our own people, not only for the Finnish people, but also for the global labor, because if we lose, everybody will certainly lose. People are looking up to us. They are looking to the Nordic countries as a model, as a successful society, also for the businesses, when people are being honest and looking at the whole picture. So in that sense, I think we owe this to our own people, but also to the whole world, so to say.
Oh, and we have a right-wing government, at least half a year. We'll have a general election coming up in the spring. They're very keen on privatizing a lot. I mean, the roads, forests, water, these discussions on these topics. In your book, in The Establishment, excellent book, you mentioned, you used the word of corporate welfare. So explain, you did mention about the railroads already in your keynote speech, but open a bit more about this concept of corporate welfare.
So, I mean, it's fascinating. In Britain for a long time, the demonisation of welfare meant it meant people who were unemployed, it meant disabled people, also millions of people who are on low-paid work, who depend on in-work benefits, rather than the massive corporate welfare that exists because of the failures of the private sector, whether it be, obviously, the financial system, which collapsed. That was billions upon billions of pounds of taxpayers' money, and they receive lots of other subsidies, whether it be support from the Bank of England, so the massive, extensive state support that the banks receive. But you've got, for example, the creeping privatisation of our national healthcare system, where companies, healthcare companies, private healthcare companies whose interests are their shareholders, receive huge amounts of taxpayers' money. We've had calamitous examples of this so-called corporate welfare. So a security company, G4S, do they operate here? I don't know if they do. G4S, they were asked during the Olympics in 2012 to provide security. They were unable to do so. And so who had to step in? The state. The army had to replace them. We had another example, Serco. They're in charge because we started privatising our justice system. We have privatised prisons in Britain. But what Serco...
Wonderful idea. Privatising the prisons, go ahead.
Yeah, but privatising, and they were in charge of tagging, electronic tagging prisoners, but they started charging the state for prisoners who were back in prison or who were dead, and they got tens of millions of pounds of public money from the state. Other examples, companies which are in charge of Atos, a French multinational company in charge of stripping social security from disabled people, often falsely, where people who are actually disabled were left, their work was taken away. So in Britain, 30% now of the British government expenditure goes on the private sector, on whether it be prisons, justice, healthcare, education, public service, criminal justice. And what we've seen is a race to the bottom, because to be competitive, what do? They cut their wages of their staff, they cut their pensions, and that's counterproductive because it suppresses morale, people leave. But because they're interested in profit, they're not efficient. And we've seen that in the British railway system. This is an inefficient, fragmented mess where tickets are expensive and where the most efficient franchise was publicly run. So the British experiment with privatising the state across the board in terms of public services, where we give huge amounts of corporate welfare, has been a terrible failure, which is why, according to the polling, even Conservative voters want the renationalisation of utilities, want a reverse privatisation of the healthcare system, and reject the use of the private sector to supply public services. So it is a plea from Britain. Do not make the terrible mistakes that were made in Britain. They've plunged the country into crisis. We've wasted hundreds of billions of pounds of money as a consequence, because at the end of the day, these companies and corporations, they're responsive to their shareholders, they want to give out dividends, they're not responsive to the needs of the public.
pros and cons on privatization. And you have a lot of topics. The healthcare is in the US is the most expensive system, and still it's quite expensive for the end user as well. Any learnings from the US system at all? Is it just keep away?
Absolutely. So I think one of the key questions again about the discussion is that here in Finland as well, I think the sort of conservative side that wants to privatize various services has really succeeded in painting the picture as the public services are always inefficient. They never work as well as private systems. And based on examples from everywhere in the world, this is not true. It's simply not true. Part of it can be true. Obviously, public services can be very inefficient. In the United States, they in fact are, for many reasons. But I do think that here in Finland, people sometimes ask me, so what's the point of comparing these countries, Britain and Finland or the United States? They're so different. Well, the point is that you can look at other countries, you can see that, okay, they privatized this, they privatized that. Are they producing better quality with less money? That's what we're aiming for, right? If we think that it should be efficient, and that's why we privatize. And most of the times, when it comes to social services, and by social services I mean these extremely important, very complicated services like healthcare or education or social security, Americans save their own retirement money, it's not actually more efficient to privatize it. But I think it would be important in the discussion, also for trade unions, to have examples from abroad, to bring them up, to show them, so that we counter this actually often false idea that public services automatically are less efficient.
Ann, you have lots of experience from the other countries as well. Any ideas from abroad we should copycat, positive, negative things about privatization?
I don't think we should copycat anything from the British model anyway. I think we are fortunate to be aware what has happened in there, and in that sense try to dock it rather than copy it. The situation at the moment here, I think, is very frightening because the privatization eagerness of this government to privatize is so huge. I was just this week, I was studying for 2 days about the growth services, as we say, which are coming, the new legislation is coming, and we're talking about the services for the unemployed in the future. And it's a mess. It's a total mess. The whole legislation as it is at the moment, the local government or the local government officials, they don't know what to do. They're in despair because everything keeps changing from week to week. Everything is built on only the fact that you need to open the market for the private companies, and everything is built on that. Nobody is looking at the individual. Nobody is looking at the services that people actually need. They are looking looking for the whole change from the point of view of making it plausible for the companies to enter. And in that sense, there is no way people are seeing it from an individual point of view, of seeing a more humane social model that we would want, but they are seeing a privatization model, and that's the sort of the driver for everything at the moment.
Yeah, just that point, is that working?
Is it working?
Yeah.
The mic is not working. Hello. Hello, hello. Well, I'll ask you a question in between. Talk about sense of ownership. You write about, in your book, about during Margaret Thatcher's era, 1980s, the privatization was so easy because Brits didn't have that sense of ownership of the... So, I mean, how to protect, I mean, privatization, fight against privatization if you don't feel, I mean, go ahead, Finnish railroads, we don't, we hate you.
That's one of the things, I wanted to say. I mean, I mean, firstly as well, I'll just answer that about the efficiency point. In the National Health Service in Britain, which is Britain's proudest achievement, and it's a huge embarrassment to neoliberals because it was founded on the basis of profit doesn't work, obviously. You need a publicly run, publicly accountable, publicly funded system, which has worked extremely well and is, you know, all Britons see it. It was called by one politician, the closest the English have to a religion is the National Health Service because of how much people value it. And that's one of the reasons it's an embarrassment to the free marketeers. But their privatisation, partly of it, has led to the doubling of management and bureaucracy, because to oversee all the private contracts and the internal competition, you need a massive management tier. So rather than being more efficient and less bureaucracy, it's meant more. But that point about ownership is really important, because what Labour's talking about at the moment is not the old-style nationalisation. So after World War II, the form of nationalisation we had, which was devised by, I suppose, the right wing of the Labour Party, was to have a top-down public corporation. So it was run by bureaucrats in London. That's not the model the left traditionally aspired to, which was democratic ownership by workers, by service users, and by consumers. So with the railways, what we're interested in, when that's brought back under public ownership in Britain, is to have passengers and workers on the railways having a democratic say over the running of the industry. And another proposal that Labour has is to make all companies with more than 250 workers give over 10% of their shares to their workforce, who will then get seats on the board and a say in the running of the company, and will get dividends linked to the performance of the company. And that's important in Britain because we have a massive productivity crisis. If French workers took one day off work every week, France would still be more productive than Britain. So we've got we need to deal with the productivity crisis. Giving workers a sense of ownership over their own companies, their own industries, their own workplaces would help that happen. So that's, I think, what we're talking about in Britain is not the bureaucratic form of nationalisation, it's democratic ownership by workers, service users and consumers. And that's, if you like, that is what made it easier to privatise nationalised industries, because people didn't feel that they owned it. It was called public ownership, but it was actually run by bureaucrats. So Margaret Thatcher could say, we'll give you all shares in these industries, then you really will be running them. But in practice, they were taken over by big multinational corporations and foreign governments. So democratic ownership is the way forward.
So we're talking about rethinking the meaning of these words, like the nationalization or freedom, as you have written about, and the marketing for the Americans, the Nordic model, as their core value, with their core value, freedom.
Yeah, so I
Does that keep the open? I mean,
yeah. Now you can. I kind of keep coming back to this: how we present this, how we see things. So we have problems, and it's important for us to fight against new suggestions, change that we truly think will make the system worse. But of course, I think we have to take seriously also, or really think that, okay, conservatives are aiming at this, so some of it is maybe just in their personal interest, but some of it actually might be something that we all could aspire to as a value, even if we disagree on how to get there. So I'll just give an example. In the United States, freedom is sort of the founding principle of the United States. Everybody in America believes that America is based on freedom.
And should have a gun as well.
Should have a gun as well, that goes with it, for some people, not everyone, maybe about a half. But so now it has become the conservative, the neoliberal, if you will, side slogan. And anything, workers' rights, unions, all that is against freedom. Yeah. Now, I think even us here, probably, I think all workers appreciate freedom. I don't think any of us are aspiring to a society where people are enslaved. So I think it would be important, and that's what I was doing with my book. I was really looking at these social services or protections of workers through the perspective of, do they give us more freedom? And I think in many ways they do give us more freedom. So we should just also be vigilant about thinking that, okay, so if they have managed to control this this discussion with these wonderful sounding ideas. So let's look at it, and let's look at what can we contribute. And I'll just briefly say about, for example, privatizing healthcare in Finland. So I believe that the public service in healthcare is the way to go, but I also think that when the conservatives in Finland talk about how, you know, people want to choose their doctor, they want to have access to the same doctor, they don't want to just go to some faceless public system where you have to wait in line. I think that's true. I mean, having a good relationship with our doctor is important for all of us. And I think that gets, for example, lost in the Finnish debate when we're fighting over it. That's a good goal, and so then we should be offering ways to get there with public service. So we shouldn't just automatically discard everything they're talking about. We should look at it and see, like, okay, well, if it's a good aspiration, then how do we support it?
Well, the freedom to choose in the idea that we're talking about at the moment at the Finnish healthcare, it's not. I would support a system where, whether it's private or public, you had the right to choose, for example, your own doctor.
Exactly.
But this is not what we're talking about here. Those who want to sort of underline the freedom of choice, you can only choose the sort of organization you're buying or you're getting your services from. So to me, it doesn't matter whether it's Mehiläinen Terveystalo or my public healthcare center. I would like to choose my doctor, and this will not be possible in this change that is about to happen here at the moment. So in a sense, I think that the freedoms that many in the US are so afraid of they've managed to sort of they've stolen the words and sort of reversed them in many sense, and that has happened here.
Let's do the same. I mean, you already stole the word of nationalization. You stole the word of freedom. How about you rebranding labor unions? What would you? What would be the modern future? The future of labor unions. How would you describe the future? I mean, what would be tempting for all of us and outside the building as well?
It's a question of security.
Security.
In one sense or another, people still want to be secure in many ways, and that has also.
So the base of the Nordic model actually is security.
It is, and now we are told that the young people, they don't want security, they don't want adventure, and they want this and that. That's not true.
That's true.
If you look at the studies, you find that all the people, all ages, want basic security, and that is something that the Labour should be providing in the future in a broader sense than it does at the moment. I think that is the basis.
Yeah, I mean, on that. Thatcherism popularised itself with freedom. That was the whole populist message of British neoliberalism, that the individual would be freed from the dead weight of the state and would therefore realise its full potential. The problem is that freedom was felt in practice as insecurity, and insecurity is not freedom. Insecurity traps the individual. If you don't have a secure home, if you're constantly frightened of being told to leave by your private landlord, if you don't have a secure job,
as Arno explains in her book,
if you don't have many hours, if you don't know how many hours you're going to get each week, in Britain we have so-called 0 hours, where you have no hours in your contract whatsoever.
Same problem here.
Same here. You're told day to day how many. I mean, how can you plan ahead? How can you have a family and set down and have roots and security with those roots? So it's the same with public services. So-called freedom has meant insecurity, which is why the working age population in Britain now is overwhelmingly supports the Labour Party. It's actually older people for whom security has been protected in Britain. Social democracy has been retained for older people correctly and stripped away for the working age population. So those who still have social democracy are voting for the Conservative Party. Those who don't have social democracy are voting for Labour. And the reason for that is because they don't have a sense of security. They are not actually free at all. Because if you're staring at your ceiling, worried about where you'll be in a week's time, that's not freedom. That's you're imprisoned. You're trapped.
And if you get used to the situation that it's bad, if it gets sort of that's the new normal, that the situation is bad. I was just interviewed by a PhD from the University of Bath, who is sort of comparing the British and the Finnish social security systems. And at the end of the interview, he said that he's been learning about our active model too, which is something that has to do with the unemployment benefits here in Finland. And he said that in Britain, people are so used to things being so bad that if they got our active model too, that we're fighting against really hard, they would be so happy that they would be overwhelmed just to have that. So we need to be really careful here that we don't sort of get used to that the lower and lower standards are the new normal.
The race to the bottom.
The race to the bottom.
Owen, New Labour went to the political centre in order to reclaim power to the Labour Party. Now, I understand you were critical towards Corbyn at some time, and now you're actually pushing the Labour Party further to left, since it seems like some of the agenda is already accepted in the political, even the right. So is your message to Finns as well that we should, I mean, if the Labour unions or Labour movement should move towards the centre or the left?
Well, I campaigned for Jamie Corbyn to be leader back in 2015 and voted for him in the both leadership contests.
Okay.
And the reason for that is the old centrist model has been discredited. In the 1990s onwards, New Labour was a product of the defeat of the left. It was a time when living standards were also rising. And in the period since the crash, we've seen social democratic parties who first accepted and embraced the market, they embraced market ideology, but then they then embraced austerity. And if you're a social democrat who doesn't believe in public investment, you are not a social democrat. And what we've seen with the left flank of the Labour Party took over the leadership is, yes, they are the left of the Labour Party, but they were the only social democrats left standing in the Labour Party. And what they're arguing for actually was traditionally the mainstream of social democracy, that you have trade union rights, that you ask the rich to pay a certain amount of money, that you have public ownership of utilities. I mean, what we're asking for in Britain is radical in our context, but actually in lots of European countries is already the norm. Publicly owned energy or rail or water or trade union rights. The sort of welfare state you have in this country, which we can only aspire to in many ways, not least childcare, which is exceptionally expensive. In Britain, people can spend 50% of their income on childcare easily. So, I mean, it's a completely different model, which is spread insecurity. So, yes, what I would say is, look at social democratic parties in Europe. The only two at the moment which are doing well are the Portuguese socialists, because of pressure from two left-wing parties, they've reversed austerity measures, they've increased wages and pensions, and the British Labour Party, which have said, end austerity, invest in the economy by asking the rich to pay more money and support public ownership. And if the other social democratic parties are in some cases, terminal crisis, it doesn't look like they're going to recover in any, where the German Social Democrats have got the lowest share of the vote in their history, well, since the Nazis, where the Spanish or the Italian or the French socialists are all collapsing. If the British Labour Party is one of the only exceptions, then I would say, having said do not learn from Britain, but I would say the exception is the Labour Party. By shifting to the left, although most people don't think about left or right, we have reversed what was, because we were going the same way. In 2015, Labour was collapsing. It lost Scotland, one of its main heartlands. It got one of its worst defeats since the war. 2 years later, on a more radical platform, it took away the majority and got that close to forming a government. So end austerity, support public investment, support public ownership. That is the future of the left.
We have just a few minutes left. Let's talk about reclaiming democracy. You experienced the rise of the Trump populism in US, and how the Rust Belt voters left the Democratic Party and went for the populists. What kind of message do you have for Finland and other parts of Europe from what you learned from US? How should society and labor unions work that this phenomenon doesn't get any bigger? Is it big already? You could actually experienced Brexit in the UK, so I know what you have gone through as well.
Well, I think that when I look at, for example, the Finnish trade unions and compare the situation to America, I think it's a big challenge because obviously there's different interests. And so there's the sort of more traditional jobs that Owen was also talking about, industrial jobs that have been decimated. Those are big Trump supporters. And I think in that case, again, sort of the ideological war has been won by the side that claims that trade unions are the enemy of employees, enemy of jobs. And so those people who traditionally were strong trade union members now vote for Trump. And trade unions are often seen as part of the problem. I'll give you an example of teachers' unions. In America, when I talk about Finland and Finnish education system, I always get the response, oh, well, I'm sure it's great because surely Finnish teachers are not unionized. Because Americans think that teachers' unions are at fault because they're lazy and they protect teachers who don't know what they're doing, and so on and so on. And so that's quite shocking for someone from Finland to see how in America the workers themselves also believe that trade unions are the problem. And I think that just shows in the wider politics in America, for example, the Democrats, the party are at disarray because people see that they are the elitists, that Hillary Clinton was the elitist. Now there's Bernie Sanders from the side. But so I feel like the American establishment left, if you will, if you want to include trade unions in the sort of establishment, has lost the hearts and faith of the people because they don't believe anymore that you are working for us. And I think so in terms of in Finland, it is extremely important for trade unions to protect the rights of workers and protect the rights that we have and not let go of those. But I think it is really important to do what you're doing today, to think about what are we offering in the future in a positive way, a good, you know, where are we going? We're not just sitting here and protecting a small part of the population and not responding to the needs of some new part. And I think young people are extremely important too, because a lot of young people obviously work in different types of jobs these days, partly because of technology, whatnot, and they do not have those steady jobs that we used to have. And I don't think that's all bad. I mean, I was a freelancer myself for 10 years, and I strongly felt that it gave me a sense of strength, and it was empowering for me to feel that I created my own work and I somewhat managed to pay the bills. So I think this is another thing that trade unions should also take seriously, that we can help positive way entrepreneurs or self-employed people or people who run their own shop, hairdressers or whatnot, so that it doesn't become this thing where any small business owner sees trade unions as the enemy who are not supporting me but are taking away from me, which we see now in the discussion of whether companies that employ less than 20 or 10 people should be able to fire their employees quicker. So this becomes this conflict, and I think that hurts us all.
Let's keep it short.
I can keep it really short because you said almost the thing that I was about to. I totally agree. We need to be in the discussion about the future, about the change of work, about the cooperation, about our ability to cooperate with the companies. But we need to also make it clear that it is our right, it is our duty to defend when we are attacked. As we are at the moment when it comes to the job security in small businesses. So in that sense, I think we need to be positive, we need to be talking about the future, we need to recognize the new forms of work or the new forms of people making their livelihoods. So in that sense, I think this thing today that we're having here is one very good example of our ability and willingness to be proactive in the future working life.
Owen, small question. The future democracy, how to save it? How to save, I mean, reclaiming democracy. Yeah, exactly. The meaning of life. And
1 minute, meaning of life.
1 minute, yes, exactly.
Oh, well, what I'd say is this. What we always have to remember is that all change is not given to us as acts of generosity and goodwill by the powerful, but every right and every freedom we win is through struggle and sacrifice from below. And that should be how we approach democracy. That, it wasn't a case that one day the powerful woke up and thought, oh, I'm feeling generous, I'll give women the vote for a laugh. Whether it be the early trade unionists who fought for the rights and dignity of working people, those who fought for democracy against the opposition of the powerful, Those who, if I think of the suffragettes in Britain and elsewhere who were dragged from demonstrations and thrown in dirty police cells, whether it be those who fought for the welfare state and public health care in the face of overwhelming opposition, those who fought against racism and sexism and homophobia, who were spat at in the streets and battened by police officers, we always remember that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Everything we have, won by people in this room, your mothers, your fathers, your grandfathers, your grandmothers and your ancestors before that we don't wait for the powerful to suddenly pull levers and deliver change, that we have to organise and fight and struggle. And the history of social progress is not one of victory, success, it's often defeat, setback, and then victory in the end. And we always remember that because it will be, in the coming months and years, for those of us who believe in a more just world, there will be many more dark moments to come in America, in Britain, and elsewhere. But if we think about what our ancestors went through, the odds stacked against them, the persecution, the oppression, how hopeless it seemed in many of the darker moments of our continent, that in the end, history will damn those who stand on the side of the oppressor. And I firmly believe that that tradition of our ancestors struggling for rights, justice, and democracy will be vindicated, but we have to have the same courage and determination. Otherwise, they will strip away our rights, our freedoms. They will continue to attack democracy. So it's up to us. We can't wait for those in powerful positions to do it for us.
Thank you so much, Owen. And Anu, so we need utopians, we need goals, we need revolutionary ideas, and hopefully during this day, Future Now will bring us more revolutionary ideas. Thank you so much, audience. Thank you so much. And